Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 269. Greta, happy Friday of the second week of Advent.
Same to you. I can't believe we're already to Gaudete Sunday.
Oh, 2 days. Well, within 2 days. Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Friday to Sundays. Yeah, 2 days. But
Right.
Happy Advent Friday to you as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rock on. In this episode, we're going to look at Tolkien's Lost Christmas poem.
Yes.
The Lost Christmas poem. This is, for those of you who might hear that and find yourselves underwhelmed by the thought of it, stick around. It's a really good poem.
It's amazing. And I'm wondering, how did you happen upon it?
I found it like several years ago. Like a blog post about it, and and I noted it, right, because I keep like a running list of everything that we might eventually talk about on the podcast, and so it's just one I've been meaning to come back and dive into. And Christmas is getting close, so I was like, let's do another sort of Christmas themed episode.
Perfect. Yeah.
But again, this is not a this is not like Jingle Bells, right? This is not jolly old Saint Nicholas, right? This is a Tolkien style Christmas poem, right?
So good.
This is a Tolkien style Christmas poem. So
you
stick
guys are
around
in for a treat. Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. You're going to enjoy this. Before we get started, we'd like to give a double up air five to our patrons. Ready, Greta?
Let's do it.
3, 2, 1. Nice.
Well done.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Andrew T., John R., Ms. Anonymous, and Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien.
Thanks, guys.
And a shout out to our newest patron, Amy H.
Amy, welcome. Thank you.
All right, let's give Amy her special air five for being the new patron.
Yeah, let's do it.
3, 2, 1. Boom.
Nice.
Hope you felt that coming through the screen right at you, Amy. And a shout out to Redhawk, who annualized his pledge.
Oh, nice.
Boom.
Thanks, Redhawk.
Thanks a lot, Redhawk.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/Tolkien Road. Greta, can you tell them what our plan is for 2022 and why they should join?
Yes. So our plan for 2022 is we are going to be doing a reread of the Silmarillion. Yeah. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you should join because, I mean, our first read was pretty great, but we've gotten our act together, I think, in a lot of ways and kind of found our groove even more so since our first read. So the second read is just going to be off the chain.
And it's going to be much more opportunity for you guys to participate with us as we go through, because so many of you have found us as we, after we finished doing our read through of the Silmarillion, right? So we've got a lot more of you now who listen to the podcast. And so it's going to be so much better in so many ways this time around. So, and get the most out of it by joining the Fellowship of the Road. Right now, you can get 2 months free if you do an annual pledge. And if you pledge at the $5 or more level, so the Elrond, I think it's Elrond, Galadriel, or Gandalf level, you can actually get a copy of one of my books, so that's the Elrond level. You get to choose which book, a signed copy for free. And then if you do the Galadriel or Gandalf level, then you get both copies for free.
Sweet.
Right. So
yeah,
annualized pledge, 2 months off, get free books. Boom.
No brainer, guys.
And anybody who becomes a patron right now, the newest perk is you're going to get a 20% off of anything in the True Myths Press store. Right now we have 3 items, but we're going to have a lot more very soon. Right. So working on those. I've got so many ideas of things I want to do, but at the very least, you can head on over there, buy some signed copies of my books for yourself, for other people, and get an awesome Tolkien Road t-shirt. So some of those have started going out. I've been hearing from people who have bought those and gotten theirs already, and they're just like, this thing is amazing. It looks great and it feels great. So the reviews are in. Tolkien Road t-shirts are where it's at.
Right. It's a 2 thumbs up kind of thing.
2 thumbs up.
2.
Yes. All right. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts as well. That always helps. 5 stars. Tell the world why you love us. We love to hear it, and we love to read those 5-star reviews here on the Tolkien Road.
Indeed, we do.
All right, time for the weekly Tolkien Road YouTube Air 5. We get a lot of Air 5. I just love doing the Air 5s, you know. I just love it.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's do this for our YouTube watchers.
All right, YouTubers coming at you.
3, 2, 1. Whoosh. Boom.
Nice.
So head on over to YouTube to be a part of the weekly Tolkien Road YouTube Air 5.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, in case you missed this announcement last week, Wisdom app. So if you've ever wanted to engage with us live, your opportunity is coming up. On Thursday, December 16th at 7 p.m. Central, we'll be going live on the Wisdom app to discuss whatever Tolkien-related things you guys want to talk about. Just follow me on the Wisdom app. You can find me, John Carswell, right? So my handle is just at John Carswell. And we are looking forward to talking with you, taking your questions, and we can't wait to hear from you. Mm-hmm. So once again, Wisdom app. Don't be a fool. Download it.
Be wise.
Be wise. That's right. Download that. That just needs to be their tag.
Be a wise fool.
That needs to be their tagline. You know.
Be a wise fool.
Or how about fly you fools to the Wisdom app?
I was just thinking the same thing. Oh my goodness! I'm glad you said it. I'm kind of mad that you said it before me.
I'm going to pitch that to the Wisdom app to just be their spokesman.
You should.
Yeah, fly you fools. Put on my big Gandalf beard and say that. It's a winning combination there. Yeah. Indeed. So anyway, this Thursday, December 16th, 7 p.m. Central, be there.
I got to put that on my calendar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you better be there too. You know,
well, I'm going to be.
That's really why people are going to show up, right? It's the opportunity to interact with you.
Well, you know, it's okay.
Yeah. I'm used to it. It's a
burden I have to bear. It's fine.
Yes. All right. Well, let's talk about Noel.
Yes.
Talk about Noel.
First of all, can I just say how much I love that hymn, first of all, the first Noel.
The first Noel, yeah.
And I just love the word Noel. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's just awesome.
It is an awesome word. Yeah, we're going to talk about where that word comes from, because it's one of those words that we use so much, but how many people actually know what it means, right?
That's a really, really good thought.
So
yeah,
as part of our discussion of the poem, we need to know what the title means. So we're going to go and unearth that, right? And this is a Tolkien podcast, so we need to do things like that. We need to dig into where words came from, right?
The philology of it all.
We need to be amateur philologists on this show.
Absolutely. And you know, our downtown Franklin is like, I think they do Christmas really well, decorating wise in downtown Franklin. But there's like, my favorite thing that they do is they put up a huge a glowing Noel sign, like on the top of one of the buildings in downtown.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
And it looks really, really cool.
It's almost like our version of the Hollywood sign.
But it's cooler.
But it's cooler because it's Noel and not like, Hollywood.
Yeah. And it's just like so understated, but so like perfect for Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rock on.
Yeah.
Good point.
I just wanted to mention that because it's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
About downtown Franklin at Christmas.
Yeah.
The tree's pretty cool and all the other decorations, but the Noel sign is my favorite.
Don't forget Christmas of a Dickens.
Oh, I can't forget Dickens of a Christmas. Oh, you're right. Christmas of a Dickens.
No, it is Dickens of a Christmas, but I always say Christmas of a Dickens because I think it sounds funny.
It does sound funny.
And I think our pastor said it that way one time. And I just got a kick out of that.
He probably did.
So,
yes.
All right. So,
Noel.
This poem was originally published in an obscure annual magazine of an Oxfordshire, I think I said that right, Oxfordshire Catholic High School in 1936. I almost said Oxfordshire. Oxfordshire Catholic High School in 1936. So the school is called Our Lady Abingdon. Our Lady Abingdon. And I'll link to this school. So it's still a school. I'll link to their website in the show notes. So you can check out like what the school looks like a pretty cool school. It's just like a independent Catholic school there in Oxfordshire. So
I wonder, did Tolkien have some kind of connection to that school?
Well, I mean, he taught at Oxford. So
well, yeah, but the high school.
I don't know. I didn't dig in too much to that. I don't know that there's a lot of research. So that's an interesting question in of itself, is why in the world did his poems get published over here?
That's what I'm wondering. How did this school like get so lucky to have a Tolkien poem in their magazine? Well,
so let's continue with our discussion because we're going to maybe touch on some things there. I don't know that I'll shed a ton of light there, but we'll at least talk about the context of this and like the historical context of it and all that. Okay. So we can note that right now. So 1936, what does that year mean to you, Greta?
1936.
In terms of Tolkien's life.
Dang it, I don't know. I'm terrible with dates.
So The Hobbit came out in 1937, right?
Okay, so 1936 itself was actually not that important.
1936, Tolkien, no one knew who Tolkien was, right? Outside of his friends and family, right?
Okay, so he had not yet made it big.
Right.
I
see. So The Hobbit had not yet been released yet. Lord of the Rings was nowhere in sight at this point, right?
Okay.
So, he's laboring away in obscurity.
Okay.
And
so a poem by him would not have been like a huge thing at this point in time, is what you're saying,
right? Now, so it's possible that like I don't believe any of his kids would have gone to this school, though I could be wrong, but I don't know the schools his sons or his kids went to off the top of my head. But I didn't see any indication that this was their school, so that's why his work were published here or something like that, right? Okay. Which you'd think they'd make that clear connection. I think so. But it seems to be somewhat mysterious. So it's possible he was friends with somebody on staff and was just like, here's some poems that, that have been rejected by all of the, by other poetry publications, by some of the more major poetry publications. So if you want to publish them over here, that would be great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. So, but anyway, it was before he was famous. So one would think that if he had handed this to anybody after 1937, they would have been like, yes, we'll publish your poetry. Right. Like
that makes sense.
I mean, seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, definitely.
But it was 1936 and no one knew who he was yet. So it was considered a lost work until 2013, when it was discovered by school principal Stephen Oliver through the request of noted Tolkien scholar Wayne Hammond. Wayne Hammond and then it's Christina Skull are these two Tolkien scholars who work together on a ton of things, and they do a lot of amazing academic work. I mean, they're in my mind, they're like the top tier Tolkien academics, Tolkien scholars, and they do a lot of like background historical work. And over here, I'm pointing to my bookshelf where I've got like my big annotated Lord of the Rings over there, and I'm pretty sure they're the ones that annotated that. I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure they're the ones that annotated that. So basically, the story is Wayne Hammond found this note where Tolkien mentions publishing 2 poems in the Abingdon Chronicle, right? Okay. Hammond realized that, okay, this is a journal associated with this school in Abingdon, Our Lady Abingdon, right, in Oxfordshire. And so he contacted the school, and the principal couldn't find the poem himself, but he asked the Sisters of Mercy, who founded the school in 1860, to search their archives and see if they could find this 1936 edition of this journal. And they discovered it. They found it, and they handed it to Oliver, and then he handed it to Hammond, and now we have it. Right. Awesome. So very cool. So, there's actually
not even 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, within the last decade, it was discovered.
Yeah.
So there was actually another poem published in the journal as well by Tolkien called The Shadow Man. But that's actually an early version of a poem called The Shadow Bride, which was previously published in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which was like a collection of poetry that we haven't done on the show yet, but we will eventually. Cool. So according to the onering.com, Oliver said, my excitement when I saw them was overwhelming. I am a great Tolkien fan and was thrilled to discover the connection with the school. I don't think Oliver is still the principal there. I looked at their website, and it looks like their headmaster, who I assume is the principal, is somebody different now. Okay. But unless I'm getting those roles mixed up. But anyway, that's how it came to be found. Yeah, that's cool. How it came to be found there. Yeah. So, by the way, I didn't realize there was a onering.com in addition to the onering.net.
Oh, I just assumed this was the onering.net.
No, the onering.net is, I think, is a more popular website. I assume it's more popular. I see him a lot more active on Twitter and that kind of thing. But the onering.com is actually a really, really nice looking website. It's been around for a long time. So, it's nice, cool to know that there's another One Ring out there.
Yeah, totally.
All right. So let's look at the poem. So I'm going to walk on some thin ice and attempt a reading of the poem, and we'll see how this goes.
I think you're going to do great.
Unless you want to go back and forth, like trade stanzas.
Whatever you think.
Okay.
I'm good with whatever.
Well, I'm putting you on the spot, so I'll go ahead and do it myself.
Okay.
All right.
I did read it out loud to myself this morning.
if you want to, I'm happy to trade stanzas if you want to.
Trade stanzas.
Okay, let's trade stanzas. Do you want to go first or second?
I'll go second.
Okay. Noel by J.R.R. Tolkien. Grim was the world and gray last night. The moon and stars were fled. The hall was dark without song or light. The fires were fallen dead. The wind in the trees was like to the sea, and over the mountain's teeth, it whistled bitter cold and free as a sword leapt from its sheath.
The Lord of Snows upreared his head, his mantle long and pale, upon the bitter blast was spread, and hung o'er hill and dale. The world was blind, the boughs were bent, all ways and paths were wild. Then the veil of cloud apart was rent, and here was born a child.
The ancient dome of heaven sheer was pricked with distant light. A star came shining white and clear, alone above the night. In the dale of dark, in that hour of birth, one voice on a sudden sang. Then all the bells in heaven and earth together at midnight rang.
Mary sang in this world below. They heard her song arise, o'er mist and over mountain snow, to the walls of paradise. And the tongue of many bells was stirred in heaven's towers to ring, when the voice of mortal maid was heard, that was mother of heaven's king.
Glad is the world and fair this night, with stars about its head, and the hall is filled with laughter and light, and fires are burning red. The bells of paradise now ring with bells of Christendom, and Gloria, Gloria we will sing, that God on earth is come. I feel like we need to be like, amen.
I totally agree.
Beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful.
Really love it. So that is Noel by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay, so let's Greta, you've already mentioned you love this. I mean, just before I get into kind of analysis, and we get into analysis, what's your impression, like just overall impression of the poem? What do you just kind of like, how do you explain what you enjoy about this poem?
Well, I love, I just feel like it's, it sets the tone. I feel like the tone of the incarnation is very well set.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like this, you know, this kind of what this, that, creation groans with eager expectation. Like I just feel like I feel that throughout the poem. And, you know, honestly, it makes me think of Midnight Mass. Like that's kind of, you know, that's really what it brings to mind for me. Well,
and with good reason. You know, you might have, this might be in the back of your mind, right? So during Advent, we don't say there's a part of the liturgy for the Mass called the Gloria, which happens at the beginning. And it's this kind of, it's actually kind of a long poem that's, you know, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to, what's the right translation? Because I've known to the highest, because we usually sing it. So now all of a sudden I can't find the words. Anyway, it begins Gloria in Latin, right? It begins Gloria in Latin. And so during Advent, we don't do that, right? During Advent, we do not sing the Gloria.
Except on the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception.
Well, true. Yeah. But the rest of it, we don't, right?
Yeah. On Sunday, which we almost always do it on Sundays.
Right.
Except during Lent and Advent.
Except during Lent and Advent. So on Christmas, it's actually during Midnight Mass, they, you know, it's almost like all of a sudden the lights come on at the Gloria and we sing the Gloria, right? It's for the first time since the beginning, you know, since Advent started. So that's a little liturgical flourish right there at the end from Tolkien, right?
The Gloria we will sing. Yeah.
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 Okay. And I mean, and so we'll have, let me get into some of the analysis on this then. And, you know, and plenty of it. You just interject as you find reason to interject, please.
I'll do it.
All right. So yeah, like I said, 1936, Tolkien is on the cusp of fame. He's not famous yet though. So this gives us some idea of why this was lost, right? It was published in an obscure journal already, and no one would have really cared who Tolkien was at that time. No one in the larger world would have had reason to care who he was. Somebody who had this journal in 1936 would have been like, oh, that's a nice poem, and moved on. I have no idea who this guy is. Overall, the feel reminds me of the wind was on the withered heath from The Hobbit. There's a poem when they're in Bjorn's house, right? And there's a poem, the wind was on the withered heath, and it's a very like kind of stark poem. It starts out in like kind of that same stark way that this poem starts out, like kind of this image of like a windswept, barren landscape. So it was reminiscent of that for me, starting off. I found a couple of other people who analyzed this say something along these lines. It feels like it would have been rejected according to the popular style of the time. There's nothing modern about it, right? And at this time, it was like modern poetry was the popular style. And so what we mean by that is like poetry that's like not what we think of as like traditional poetry, right? Like this feels very traditional. This feels like very like kind of, easy rhyme scheme, right? Nothing too fancy here. The popular poets of the time were like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, people like this who did not write quote unquote traditional or normal poetry, right? They wrote complicated, just poetry that kind of like jumped all over the place. It could be, they did write some stuff that could be qualified as more, is more traditional, but they're known as moderns, right? And they were famous for writing poems like that just were way outside the box and in every kind of poetical convention.
Gotcha.
So, you can kind of see why it's interesting to think like, did Tolkien try to have this published in like one of the more major poetic journals, and they rejected it because it wasn't, it wasn't modern enough, or they're just like, oh, nice poem, put it in a, book of nursery rhymes or something like that, and which I don't know. We have no record of whether that happened or not, but it would be a great thing to find out that it did, just so it could be another like, thing of Tolkien being like, guess what, moderns did it traditional way, did it my way. And now who's more famous than all of you clowns, right? Who's more popular than all you clowns?
If it ain't broke.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So anyway, it definitely does not feel like I guess what I'm saying is it feels out of place coming as it does in the 20th century, much like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings really do, right? When you think about what are the accepted, literary conventions of that particular period. Literary devices. So it follows a pretty straightforward A-B rhyme scheme. And there is heavy use of alliteration, as we would expect from Tolkien, right? So some examples of that alliteration: grim was the world and gray last night. So we have the grim and gray, right?
The fires were fallen dead.
Yep. The fires were fallen dead. Let's see. Oh, where is it? There's some other ones in there. Oh yeah. Or mist and over mountain snow, right? Mist and mountain.
Misty, the voice of mortal maid.
Voice of mortal maid. Yeah. So very popular with the alliteration, which I appreciate because I'm a huge fan of alliteration.
I love alliteration too. Yeah.
So, and then it's 5 stanzas of 8 lines each. So broken, and it's pretty even that way, right? 8 lines per stanza, and then 5 stanzas. I called the meter irregular at first, though it seems, so I guess it's actually ballad meter would be a better way of putting it. Now it's kind of rooted in this 8/6 meter, right? So it's like, you count the syllables, like grim was the world and gray last night. The moon and stars were fled, right? The moon and stars were. Yeah, so that's 6. The moon and stars were, maybe it's 5. Okay. Why am I'm not counting that right. Anyway, it's 6.
It's 6.
Yeah. So ballad meter, which apparently, is what this is actually called. And ballad meter can actually be a little bit irregular, according to what I found about it on Wikipedia. So I guess we might call this a ballad, or at least ballad meter. Okay.
Yeah.
And then of course, very strong imagery, right? Both at the symbolic and real level.
Yeah.
So
you feel like you're like experiencing it, like you're there.
And we know that Tolkien was so good at that. He was just really good at, taking, like letting you see the place where where all of this was happening. in your mind's eye, and then also having a strong symbolism with with those things. So overall, it has this kind of vague mythological quality to it, is how I would describe it. So let's talk about that title, Noel. All right. So familiar. We all use that word, especially if we're in, English speaking countries. If you're in France, I'm sure you do, because that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
But
does it normally have an umlaut over the O?
It can't. It can.
I feel like I've seen it written.
But we never use we never use those kinds of things in English, right? We don't use accent marks and umlauts and all that kind of stuff normally in English. So most of the time it's just dropped. So that word, like, we use it all the time at Christmas time. We sing the first Noel, we post it up above, buildings in downtown Franklin, and we all know what it means. It means Christmas or something having to do with Christmas.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful word. It really just has kind of a graceful quality to it.
It really does. Yeah.
But what does it mean? What does it actually mean? Where does it come from? How many of us could actually say that we know that? So here's what I found. Basically, Noel has to do with birth. So it actually comes from the Latin, right? So, where we get the word like nativity, but via French, right? So let me see if I had this pulled up earlier. Apparently I closed the window. But yeah, so I'm looking, you just Google Noel meaning, and you'll see, Christmas, especially as a refrain in carols and on Christmas cards, but its origin is from Latin, natalis, through French, Noel. So that's where you get the umlaut over the E, right there in French. And then Noel in English. And it says it's based on the Latin natalis or natal, right? So that's another word that we use in, in English that maybe comes more directly from Latin, right?
Yeah.
And, you would know this because you work on prenatal and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that's where the word comes from. It just has to do with, birth, right? So natalis in Latin, we can look up the exact meaning of that here. And it just means birthday, right? So Noel is like birthday. It's like,
there we go.
It's like a birthday song, right? All right. So when you sing Noel, you're singing birthday. There you go.
Yeah. So the first Noel is the first birthday,
right,
which would be Christ's birth.
Yeah. But of course, words like this have more meaning than just the root meaning, right? Words take on all the symbolic, words like this take on an abundance of symbolic weight, of emotional context, of spiritual context. All these things get poured into these words, and they mean so much more than just birthday, right? This is not just a birthday. This is the birthday, right? The birthday. The day of birth. The day of birth of what? The day of birth of Christ. The day of birth of the new creation, right? And so we can see that theme overriding the whole of the poem. So the stanzas. Stanza 1. I read this and I'm just like, wow, this is a wasteland he's describing. Lightless, lifeless, deadly. Grim was the world and gray last night. The moon and stars were fled. No moon, no stars. Hall was dark. Fires were dead. And man, that wind, it was just kind of ripping across the land like a sword being drawn from its sheath, right? Like
piercing.
Yeah, piercing wind.
Cold. Yeah, I want to say something real quick.
Yeah.
This kind of this poem also made me think of the prayer that is said as part of the St. Andrew's Novena. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the St. Andrew's Novena. I wasn't until a few years ago, but it's not even technically a novena because it goes from November 30th, which is the Feast of St. Andrew, until Christmas Day. So it's much longer than 9 days, which is typical novena. But the part of that, that prayer is, hail and blessed be the hour and the moment in which the Son of God was born of the most pure Virgin at Bethlehem in Bethlehem at midnight in piercing cold. And whenever I pray that prayer, I'm always thinking, I'm like, piercing cold, like, okay, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
Like, does it really get piercing cold? in the Middle East. I don't know. Maybe it does because it's desert and it gets cold in the desert. Anyway, that's mostly beside the point. But there's that term piercing cold.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking when I read that line, a sword leapt from its sheath, you think of swords piercing, and it kind of drew me to thinking of the St. Andrew's Novena prayer.
Yeah.
So it has that very kind of same, like just that eager expectation feel to it for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I do think, I don't know about Bethlehem in particular, but I do believe that it gets, like, I know in deserts, sometimes even where it gets very hot, it can get very cold at night.
Very cold. It's a climate of extremes, right?
Yes.
Very hot during the day, cold at night.
It can be. Now, I don't know if that applies to all deserts or just certain deserts, but I have heard that at least.
Yeah. But it's really kind of placing, I feel like this poem and also the St. Andrew's Novena prayer is really placing you kind of in that moment, of drawing ever nearer to the birth of Christ. It's like you're there, like waiting to experience it.
Right. And certainly for Europeans, right, for the Christians of Europe, they would have experienced winter, the time of Christ's birth, always as a cold season, right? So we can understand how for them there was no other context for it, right? Like, and
it was always cold at Christmas.
For them, it's always cold at Christmas, right? It's always a time when the world is barren. So it's like it's interesting to think about that, like Christmas in a historical context like that, for kind of Christian Europe, being that it's associated with like the barrenness, like barrenness and the like windswept world, right? Cold, windswept world. It's kind of good timing, right, for them. It's you wonder if it if it had been if it had grown up down under, when it's like warm during during that time of year, their summertime, would Christmas have the same connotations, that it does now? One would think it wouldn't, but anyway.
That's a really good thought. It's interesting to think about.
So stanza 2, the Lord of Snows upreared his head. So stanza 2 begins with that very like interesting figure, the Lord of Snows. I would assume that based on the rest of the poem, is referring to the devil, right? The Lord of this world. It could just be intended to be like a, kind of a mythological god, like the Lord of Snows, right? But it seems like this Lord of Snows,
like a Yeti, maybe.
A Yeti.
A Yeti. Yetis are white, right?
Sure, I guess. I'm glad he didn't say the Yeti appeared.
I'm glad too.
Yeah, the Lord, but we can. So just that though, right? The Lord of Snows, right there, right? So this is before the Lord of the Rings, obviously, but we see these little notes in this poem that predates even The Hobbit. And we see things like the Lord of Snows, which is evocative of, the idea of like the Lord of the Rings, right? This ominous title that comes later on. So we see Tolkien even kind of using that Lord of this kind of thing early on. And in the New Testament, the devil is referred to sometimes as like the Lord of this world, right? Like he's like ruler over this world in the sense of like this fallen world, right? So the Lord of Snows upreared his head, his mantle long and pale, upon the bitter blast was spread and hung over hill and dale. So there's not just this lifeless world, but there's this Lord of Snows who is, causing these problems, right? And into this deadly world is born a child, capital C. Now, let me say this. I've used this word so much and I see Tolkien use it so often, but I didn't actually know what a dale was. We may have looked this up in the past, but we have over hill and dale. Yeah, but it's a valley, right? So dale is just a term for a valley, and apparently it refers to like kind of an English valley, right? So dale is an open valley. It's used most frequently in the lowlands of Scotland and in the north of England. So there you go. Yeah. So we have stanza 2, the Lord of Snows, and we have into the dead world, into this barren place is born this child. Stanza 3, we have the sky pierced by the light of heaven, right? So again, this lightless sky, no moon, no stars, pierced by the light of heaven. And one voice of a sudden saying, the imagery of like the kind of the dark sky and like the single point of light, and then the voice singing reminds me of Kirathungel, right? So Sam singing in Kirathungel. Again, we see these little glimpses of like, okay, I see him connecting the dots, like, and now maybe I'm starting to get a better perspective on what he meant by this whole, fundamentally religious and Catholic thing, like with this, with the symbolism of it, right? The different symbols of things that we're seeing. I mean, we can really see it starkly here in this poem, right? This is a very Christian poem. This is a very explicitly Christian poem, but these things do not seem far, like, out of place. It would not seem out of place in the context of Middle Earth, right? We can see this kind of poem. We see this kind of poem happen in Middle Earth, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
The bells of heaven and earth ring, and I think this lends it sort of an eternal perspective, right?
Yeah.
Are they ringing at this exact moment as this child is born? Well, that I don't think there were any bells, at the moment of Christ's birth in this world in a historical sense that were ringing for him, right? But from the eternal perspective, the bells of the world and the bells of heaven ring for him, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, with this being stanza 3, so it's right in the middle of the poem, right? There's just this like 180, right, in the imagery, from darkness and barrenness to all of a sudden there's light and song. Just like, kind of leads into, it's kind of like that gradual ascent, right? And then you get to the middle and you're like, okay, we're almost there. And then there's, and then the rest of the poem obviously is all about light and song. So,
yes.
Oh, am I not loud enough?
Yeah. I think you are, although I just always look louder than you are. So,
well,
yeah,
that's kind of the story of our lives.
I just want to make sure they can hear you. So,
well, as do I.
So just make sure you're speaking closer to that microphone.
Okay.
All right. So, so moving on to stanza 4. Mary's song is heard everywhere, right? So, we have her singing. We have this single voice of a sudden saying in stanza 3, and then in stanza 4, her song is heard everywhere. This got me thinking again. I alluded to the Murray letter earlier with the fun Lord of the Rings is of course fundamentally religious and Catholic. One of the other things he says in that letter is he refers to Our Lady, right? Which of course the school is Our Lady of Abingdon. And he says in that letter, and of course, by your references to Our Lady, upon which all my own small perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. And so this little, he brings up Mary here himself in this poem and her voice. And it just reminds me strongly of that passage, right? Like, okay, that's what he means, right? When he's talking about like all of his perception of beauty, kind of like the beauty of this narrative, the beauty of this overarching myth of, light piercing this world of darkness, heavenly light piercing this world of darkness, right?
Yeah. And there's that imagery of simplicity and majesty. I mean, I love that. What's that? It's not really an oxymoron, but it's like simple is often not thought of as majestic, and majestic is there a term for that? Like, anyway, they don't they kind of,
no, I mean, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. Like they don't think of them as going together. Right. But Mary, embodies both of them, right? You think of the simplicity of the stable where Christ was born, right? But then also the majesty of the event that was occurring there. I mean, it's really kind of it's a beautiful kind of, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it's kind of
juxtaposition.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. That's it. Yeah. I love the juxtapositionness of it.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Juxtapositionness.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
I was going to say on that, and good point, right? So, juxtaposing the simplicity and the majesty. This also, the fact that what we're talking about here is this incarnation, and we have this like kind of, movement from the darkness of the world into, all of a sudden like light piercing from heaven, right? That's very eucatastrophic.
It is.
It's very eucatastrophic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
the happy turn.
Of course, what did Tolkien say about the incarnation and on fairy stories, he said it's the eucatastrophe of man's history, right? Of man's story.
Wait, the incarnation, not the resurrection.
The incarnation is the eucatastrophe of man's story, and the resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the incarnation.
Yeah. Nice. Cool.
Yeah. So, and here we have it right here, right? Literally, and of course, on fairy stories would come 2 years later in 1938, but I'm sure Tolkien was already thinking about these things at this time. He's writing The Hobbit, starting to think more deeply about these questions. And here we have, he's writing about that thing that he called the great eucatastrophe, right? Of man's history, the true eucatastrophe, in the incarnation here.
Yeah.
So this poem is eucatastrophic. There you go. And like I said before, we got a Misty Mountains shout out, right? The mist in the mountains, not exactly misty, not Misty Mountains per se, but o'er mist and over mountain snow. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Love me some mist covered mountains.
Oh yeah.
As Mark Knopfler sings about them. Yeah. Have I told you that my theory of Tolkien and Mark Knopfler is the musical Tolkien?
No.
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
I just think I'm going to do a video on it at some point, like comparing the two. Tolkien being the writer and Mark Knopfler being the musician, the musical form of Tolkien in my book. So
nice. I'll look forward to that.
And all of the reasons for that.
Cool.
All right. And then stanza 5. So one of the things I noticed about the stanza, which I found really interesting, is it starts off in kind of a reversal of the first stanza. I don't know if you noticed this, Greta. The first stanza, grim was the world and gray last night. Fifth stanza, glad is the world and fair this night.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. So it is. It's like
grim
opposing.
to glad.
Yeah.
And it's last night to this night.
This night.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Nifty.
That's really cool.
So with stars about its head.
Oh, yeah. And the first stanza, the stars were not there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the hall is filled with laughter and light. Remember that fire was fallen dead, right?
Dark. Yeah.
And fires are burning red. Yeah. So.
Oh, it is. It's totally the opposite. Each line for line.
Yeah. Those first 4 lines of this stanza are the opposite of the first 4 lines of the first stanza. So
that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah. So, so that is pretty cool. I like it, when we can kind of see that connection when a poem rounds itself off that way.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that, just a beautiful little note. And then it winds up, the bells of paradise now ring with bells of Christendom, and Gloria, Gloria, we will sing that God on earth has come. Right. So that Gloria, Gloria is not just like a general Gloria, Gloria. Again, as we explained at the beginning, it's the Gloria of the Mass, right? The Mass of Nativity, the celebration of the coming of Christ.
And I love the mention of the bells of paradise and the bells of Christendom, right? The bells of paradise, heaven, I'm assuming, and then Christendom, the church. It's just kind of that how we, at Mass, it's basically
the meeting of heaven and earth.
Yeah, the meeting of heaven and earth, and that's what we see there with paradise and Christendom, the meeting of heaven and earth, with the bells all ringing together. Right on. Yeah. Ooh, I love it. So good. Great stuff. Yeah. So great little poem here by Tolkien. I'm so thankful that it was recovered through the work of the diligent work of Wayne Hammond. I think we should all be thankful as Tolkien fans to have any and all of Tolkien's writings. I was actually through the process of this, I realized that there's actually a whole lot of other poems by Tolkien that are not in his Middle Earth works. Oh. So I found another database of stuff to eventually cover on the podcast. Wow. Like I've said before, like at this point, like we have like infinite things to talk about at some point. Infinite. So, but of course we're going to go back to the Silmarillion next. So yeah, that's the plan. Yeah. And then we have 2 more episodes before the end of the year, before our Silmarillion. We return to the Silmarillion and got some fun stuff planned for both those episodes. Awesome. All right. So let's talk about some correspondence. Okay. Hey, I'll have links to a bunch of different things. So I'm gonna have links posted to a really beautiful reading of this poem that's on YouTube, and then an article in the Guardian about how the poem was discovered, and then the link to Our Lady Abingdon, and then a link to Wayne Hammond and Christina Skoll's WordPress blog, where it talks about the process of finding this poem. And I just want to give a shout out for the reading they're going to link to. I mean, it's like, it gave me chills.
It's very well produced.
Really
it has a great video imagery to go along with it. The individual reciting the poem has a beautiful deep voice, does a sounds like a pro compared to us, like, right here doing it live.
For sure. And it's not very long. I mean, it's less than 3 minutes, I think.
Beautiful.
So definitely worth
beautiful background music.
Yeah. Worth a listen and watch for sure.
Yeah. Very artistically done. So definitely give it a watch.
Yeah.
Okay. So some correspondence. So we have we're going to do a correspondence theme of Tolkien versus Narnia. So from our episode a couple weeks ago, you weren't a part of it, but this is an episode I did a couple weeks ago with David Bates and Holly Ordway. So we had some good feedback from that, and I'm going to discuss some of that.
All right.
So the first one I wanted to mention is from longtime listener Jennifer on December 7th. So this is really interesting. Jennifer says, and this is in context of what did Tolkien really think of Narnia? You can go back and listen to that episode. And was this, and so there's a question in all of that of, did Tolkien and Lewis have like a big falling out later in life? Right. And it doesn't, there's some people that say like, oh, Tolkien didn't like Narnia because he and Lewis had this falling out. And it's like, what we discovered is like, no, it's really just, he just had some issues with Narnia as a work. It wasn't about his friendship with Lewis or anything like that.
It wasn't personal.
It wasn't personal at all. They were dear friends. And Jennifer makes a great point, which I did not realize. Lewis nominated Tolkien for the Nobel Prize in Literature for The Lord of the Rings. And she says, why would he have done that if their friendship had cooled off, as Carpenter suggests? Did Tolkien know that Lewis had done this? This was something that hardly anyone knew about until the information was released 50 years or so later on who the runners-up were. But then we have all drunk the Humphrey Carpenter and Tom Shippey Kool-Aids. So Jennifer, not a big fan of Humphrey Carpenter or Tom Shippey, it would seem like. Kudos to all three of you for this episode. Bravo. Well, thank you, Jennifer. And I want to mention too, I found a link, and I'll try to remember to post this as well on the BBC website, that talks about Lewis nominating Tolkien for the 1961 Nobel Prize for in literature for Lord of the Rings. And of course, why, so he got nominated. Well, did he win it? And it's like, of course not. Right. The Nobel Prize jury said the result has not in any way measured up to storytelling of the highest quality.
What did win it that year? Do you know?
Who knows? It's probably some work that no one even remembers. No, I shouldn't say that.
Oh,
was it Graham Greene?
Oh, if you,
no, I do like Graham Greene. So I'm just saying, like, let's see, 1961 Nobel Prize Literature.
Let's see. Did they only give out one?
It's nothing against the works that actually win it, right? It's just the attitude of the people who select the works, right? That can be so frustrating. So
it was not Graham Greene.
Ivo Andrić, who's Serbian. Yeah. So anyway, it was not Graham Greene either, but and I'm not sure what that book was for that year. Anyway.
That's crazy.
But I will link to this article. It's an interesting discussion of all of that. Oh, here it says Yugoslav writer Ivo Andrić won for the epic force from which he has traced themes and depicted human destinies. I'd love to see C.S. Lewis's like letter recommending Tolkien for it, right?
Oh yeah.
It's just, at some point as a Tolkien fan, you're just like, who needs him?
Right.
Like who needs the literary elite, right, in their opinions at all?
Yeah, and who needs the recognition?
Right.
Yeah.
We all know it's the greatest thing ever written, right? Yeah. That's all that matters. And most people, like so many more people would agree, if you had to pick one consensus work, at least amongst English speaking peoples, right? You probably have the Bible, and then, which, it's kind of, everybody says the Bible. So it's kind of like not fair to say the Bible. And then you say Lord of the Rings, right? That's what most people, or maybe not most people, maybe not a raw majority, but if you had to like just give people the opportunity to say anything they wanted, I bet Lord of the Rings would be up there, in at least in the top 10, if not number one itself.
Yeah.
So
we were talking about this with friends just a couple of weeks ago about 3 works of literature that greatly influenced your life. And I think half of us said Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it's just like snobs. Like, who cares what they think?
Who cares?
You might have cared back then, but at this point, who cares?
Yeah. That's really cool though, that Lewis nominated Tolkien. I think that's really cool. I did not know that. Yeah.
It's well, and I'm just very grateful for Jennifer for pointing that out. It's it's good to know, and it just reinforces that, like, they may have not like spent as much time together later in life, but they were, told, like, they still had much admiration for each other. And that's another thing we discovered in that episode is like, even though Tolkien wasn't like he wasn't like wearing the Narnia t-shirt everywhere, he still he had copies of the books. He would give them to kids. He admired them. And those two guys just were like, they were everything to each other. Right. They were incredible friends who did incredible things for each other's lives.
Yeah.
Right.
And incredible friendships have an incredible way of just withstanding all the stresses and, craziness that life will throw at it. So, yeah.
I would have loved to see like Lewis's reaction when Tolkien didn't win. I'm sure Lewis was just like, oh, like what kind of like witty British Don things did he say in response to that?
Yeah. I'm sure
it could have been a fly on the wall.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Jennifer, thanks a lot for that comment. Good one.
Yeah, thank you.
Our next note is from Marilyn librarian. So Marilyn's note is from November 29th. Subject: Tolkien and Lewis and Father Christmas. Hello, Carswells. Another case of 2 episodes in 1 email for me today. Firstly, the Tolkien-Lewis episode. Tom Bombadil came up then. To me, his presence and his enigmatic nature show that Tolkien felt a real secondary world would have inexplicable mysteries just like our own. Tolkien gives several explanations for Tom, and I see no reason why they might not all be true. I find it interesting the ways in which Carpenter's biography is being, shall we say, challenged by some more recent scholars. Having been the sole authorized biography for so long might lead other authors to some frustration, knowing that he had access to materials they cannot currently obtain for research. Certainly, as new information comes to light, it is useful to provide updates and or point out contradictions. However, any consideration of Carpenter must also include Christopher. As I understand it, Christopher Tolkien nixed Carpenter's first draft of the biography and also had a heavy editorial hand throughout the version we have now. So it seems only fair that scholars would consider the final product as the work of 2 authors rather than just one, and focus their attention on the content of the work rather than on the characters or circumstances of either of those contributors. Perhaps one day there will be access to more sources which will allow us to trace the development of the work, even as Christopher did for his father's writings. As far as Father Christmas, and let me say that's a great point, right? Something we didn't necessarily talk a lot about. We haven't talked a lot about, and there has been maybe started to be some increasing backlash towards Carpenter's biography. And I think people, over time, people will find fault with it. I think there's in Ordway's book, she makes a lot of very interesting points, or at least they were eye-opening points to me. And I think a lot of others. How valid they were is certainly open to discussion, but when I look at that, that's a great point, right? That Christopher had a lot of say in what Carpenter was able to publish, right? So at the end of the day, whatever came out had to have some level of approval in terms of Christopher Tolkien, right? And one would assume that he wouldn't want Carpenter to get anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
So
that's true.
But of course, maybe it was at the point where he was just like, we always have to remember that publishers have a say in these things too. And I feel like this was early. Like, so when did Carpenter's biography come out? This is a, let's see, Humphrey. I have a point to looking this up as I do this. All right. So Humphrey Carpenter, it came out in 1977. So it came out in the same year as the Silmarillion, 4 years after Tolkien's death. Christopher, I feel like, was still finding his feet as far as like where he stood on everything as his father's literary executor, right? Or executor, however you say that word. This is the year the Silmarillion came out. And we know that Christopher looked back as soon as that was published and was like, I didn't do a good job. He looked back and he was just like, I need to, And he spent the rest of his life almost like trying to like correct that. Right. So I feel like we can look at the biography and see that there's maybe this came a little early and Christopher was maybe feeling some pressure to get this biography done. And so he's like, you know what, this is Carpenter's manuscript. I'm going to kind of hack away at this myself. And then there you go. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, if he could have had a do-over on it, I don't know. It's interesting to ask that question. Like, would he have wanted to do it over? I don't know. But Marilyn, I think your point is valid as well. I mean, it's, at some point, I guess somebody needs to do that. There needs to be an official, like another take on Tolkien's life. He's a notable enough figure, I think, to where it warrants that.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I think maybe 4 years after his death, I can understand why it came out then, but there's so much more we've learned in that time.
Yeah.
And so many more people have had a chance to weigh in with their own scholarship and own perspectives that, you know, it'd be interesting to have somebody else do a really good deep dive on that.
I completely agree. Yeah.
All right. Marilyn's letter continues. As far as Father Christmas showing up in Narnia goes, one might remember that he has a lengthy history with more than a few pagan origins. These would certainly fit in with fauns, centaurs, giants, and talking beasts. And so, yeah, this is talking about Father Christmas showing up in Narnia, which is, we're joking about how weird that is, right? And The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. I suspect that it was the word Christmas that Tolkien objected to most of all, because it refers clearly to a unique event in our primary world, and thus violates Tolkien's own understanding of how to create a secondary world that requires no suspension of disbelief. On the other hand, I doubt even Lewis would have felt comfortable with an overt reference to Odin, given his full knowledge of that deity, despite Odin being an old man with a large beard who traveled across the winter sky accompanied by animals. I suspect that Father Christmas in Narnia was a simple device to allow Lewis, the author, a method of presenting Peter with his sword, Susan with her horn, bow and arrows, and Lucy with her cordial and dagger. Yeah, and I mean, I think Father Christmas is just it's a children's book, and so it's like Father Christmas is just a very like recognizable children's figure too. Yeah. I think, you know, for them, and so it's like, well, of course, Father Christmas gives gifts, so
makes sense.
And Father Christmas is on the side of Aslan, you know, at the end of the day, and Aslan is, of course, the Christ figure of the story. So
there you go.
You know,
yeah,
that works. She goes on, speaking of Father Christmas, I enjoyed your first episode on the letters. So Tolkien's Father Christmas. Carpenter has some good information on the history of the letters and how they were delivered in both the biography and in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. I recommend them to you. Also, there's an article in the free online Journal of Tolkien Studies by Janet Croft, Volume 6, Number 2, 2018, called Beyond the Hobbit, about Tolkien's writings for children. Here's a link to download it. So I'll try to remember to share that as well. And she said, or you can just read the text here. So I'll share all these things. We have a lot of links today. And then she ends by saying, your instincts were sound when you guessed that the names of the bears might mean something in another language, but the language is not Norse nor even Scandinavian. It is Finnish. Should have known.
We were close.
Yes.
We were close.
But in a linguist's mind, that's like not close.
That's true. Geographically, though.
Well, geographically close. Yeah. Finnish is its own language and cultural mythic system, distinct from any other European language but Hungarian. As you know, Tolkien was fascinated by it and based the sounds of Quenya on it, as well as a few meanings. Aino, meaning peerless, sounds rather like Ainur, don't you think? Interesting.
Oh, indeed, yes.
She says, anyway, Karhu is Finnish for bear, while Paksu means thick, and Valkotuka means white hair. So there you are.
There we go. Nice.
All the best, Marilyn.
Awesome.
Marilyn, thanks once again for another one of your epic letters. Always appreciated.
So good. So good.
Next note is from Alfred Vincent on YouTube. Alfred says, my wife is a great cook. She is of Vietnamese descent. I love many of her native foods, some not so much, even though she cooks them to perfection. I do not hate her cooking or the food she cooks. Sometimes certain things are just not my taste. So why is he sharing this? Because that's the point we were kind of making about Lewis, how Tolkien felt about Narnia, right? So, yeah, he was not a fan of Narnia overall, but that doesn't mean that he hated Lewis or something like that, or like, you know, that he and Lewis were like enemies or something, became enemies.
Making an analogy.
He's making an analogy of saying like, hey, I'm married to this woman. I love her. She's a great cook. Sometimes I like her food. Sometimes I don't. It's just a matter of taste, right? And so Tolkien like loved the space trilogy, like C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, right?
And Narnia just wasn't his cup of tea.
Narnia wasn't his cup of tea. That's right.
At first, I thought when you were reading that, my first thought was of Turkish Delight. I thought maybe you guys had like done a deep dive on Turkish Delight.
Oh, yeah.
But Anyway,
not my taste.
Not my taste
not
either.
my taste.
I got it for the kids one year for Christmas and put in their stockings because they were like obsessed with Narnia that year. I don't think they really liked it either.
How many people have like tried Turkish Delight over the years who have never tried it otherwise because it's in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
Yeah.
Like, Edmund like basically sells his soul for Turkish Delight.
Yes. Like, oh, it must be delicious.
Must be amazing, man. And then you try it and you're like,
what is
no,
this?
not so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure. I think I've had it when I was younger and I thought it was tasty, but it wasn't like it's not like horrible to me, I guess. It's just it's not like this is amazing,
Yeah.
But maybe I've just never had good Turkish Delight. I don't know.
That could be. That could also be. Yeah. I do love Vietnamese food though. I will say that.
I don't know if I've ever had Vietnamese food specifically. I've had a lot of other like Southeastern Asian types of cuisine, but I'm not sure I've ever actually had Vietnamese food.
Maybe we need to knock that off your bucket list.
Maybe we do.
Yeah.
Maybe we do. Alfred, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Great point. And our final note for today is from GGQ, also from November 20th, and also in response to the Tolkien versus Narnia episode. GG says, I think first love has a lot to do with preferences. Also, in my youth or instance, I loved fairies and the idea of interacting with them, whereas my daughters loved the idea of animals being special. I loved Tolkien and my daughter loved Narnia and read that to her children. She's now loving Tolkien, but he isn't their first love. And it's obvious. So,
See, to each his own.
Yeah. To each his own. Fair enough. Fair enough. But at some point, the rabid Tolkien fans, will just be like, but come on, please. So, anyway, great points.
Really good stuff.
All right. Well, thanks for the great correspondence, y'all.
Yes, thank you.
And we'd love to hear it from each and every one of you. TolkienRoadPodcast@gmail.com, TolkienRoad.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you can find us. So that's all for this week.
All righty.
Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: Andrew T,
John R,
Ms. Anonymous,
Redhawk,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
Shannon S,
Brian O,
Emilio P,
Zeke F,
James A,
James L,
Chris L,
Chuck F,
Ozzy V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
Jonathan D,
Eric S,
Eric B,
Johanna T,
Mike M,
Robert H,
Paul D,
Julia,
and Werty,
as well as those celebrating their Patreon anniversary in December: Kevin C,
Katie W,
Zeke F,
Emilio P,
Margaret L,
Brian O,
and Shannon S.
Thank you guys. And thanks to all of our listeners and watchers.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And we will talk at you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.